It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you tonight at this Rewiring Australia event to chat about the policy roadmap for South Australia's green steel future. Without further ado, I will introduce those that we have on the panel. Right next to me, we have Simon Nicholas, who is the lead analyst for the global green steel sector at the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, or IEFA, for those of you who are energy and climate wonks. We have Dr. Saul Griffith, the founder and chief scientist at Rewiring Australia. And we have Michelle Howie, who's jumped in at the very last minute, which I'm hugely appreciative of. Michelle is the Innovation Development Manager at SA Power Networks, but is also the Australian representative on the World Energy Council Future Energy Leaders Program. So, short round of applause for everyone. You're all here, obviously, you've attended a green steel event, so I'm assuming you're interested in green steel. I'm personally very excited about green steel, and especially here in South Australia, because of the wealth of renewable energy in the state, the industrial know-how and existing industrial capacity of this state, as well as its existing iron ore resources. It's got all the right ingredients, but as we know, it's like having all the right ingredients in your cupboard to make a cake. It's great if you've got all the ingredients there, but it doesn't mean anything unless you get those ingredients out. But I want to open up to the panel first about why you're interested in green steel and why green steel matters to you in your world. And Simon, I might start with you.
Good question. So I think I've been at IEFA for, well, it will shortly be 10 years, and spent most of my time looking at what the outlook for thermal coal looks like. In Australia, increasingly challenged by renewable energy around the world. I never used to look at metallurgical coal used steel making because it just looked like it was not challenged at all. So I just didn't even go there. But then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, things really seem to be changing. And technology-wise, it's largely in Europe, which has ever been sort of leading the way in the sort of initial phases of the steel technology change, and as we know, sometimes these steel technology transitions happen faster than we expect. So yeah, that's sort of where it all started, and looking at this steel technology transition here in Australia, probably particularly important and interesting just because we are by far the world's biggest iron ore exporter. It's our biggest export. Most of it, China absolutely dominates in terms of where our iron ore goes. They're now looking like they're certainly beyond peak steel demand. So there's all sorts of questions about the future of Australia's biggest export, forecasts of declining prices, and there's a big question about what Australia does now to sort of secure its biggest export.
I'm interested in green steel, so much so that my first degree was in metallurgical engineering, and my first job was with BHP on the Rodden bar mill in Newcastle. So I chipped slag off more than one blast furnace in my life. So age-old interest in steel, and the last 10 years of my career have been defined by electrification for decarbonisation reasons. And at the moment I'm actually working with a few groups around the world on green iron projects. So can give you I believe from the cutting edge. Very much interested in it because it is 8.5% of global emissions. More so, I think, if you wish to drive a dagger into the cold dead heart of the natural gas industry, you have to think of their core business, which is industry, and the first job up there is iron.
I would definitely credit South Australia's ambition in green steel as one of the reasons that got me into the energy sector. So I was initially working in telco, but decided that I wanted to find an industry where I could think global and focus on decarbonisation on a global scale, but from South Australia. And I would credit my shift from telco into energy to 3 key things. It would be reading the books of Dr. Saul and also Ross Garnaut as really pivotal in helping me understand what our role is as South Australians to help global decarbonisation, looking into electrification and exporting our renewable electricity embedded into products like green steel. So that the books, also attending local events like Future Energy Week, where I was sort of learning a bit more about the broader context of Australia and South Australia's place in the sector. And I felt like, wow, this is the place I need to be working and putting my energy and my effort. And then the third thing would be seeing our Premier overseas, working with partners in South Korea and Japan, and seeing that there was opportunity for me, if I pivoted into the sector, to make a global impact.
Excellent. I'd like to welcome to the panel Dr. Katie Epworth, who is the National Policy Director of the Electrical Trades Union. Why green steel matters in your world. And I'm just going to give you a second to think about that from, I guess, a union worker perspective. But I just wanted to, while I do that, draw on what Saul was saying about, yes, steel is 8 to 9% of the world's emissions, which is huge. And Australia exports more than 50% of the world's iron ore. Additionally, pretty much all our iron ore gets processed into iron and steel by blast furnaces, which is the most emissions-intensive pathway possible. So from punching above our weight and driving the biggest possible impact on global emissions, for me, there's really nothing else we can do that's bigger and more important than creating green iron here in Australia and helping our trading partners decarbonise their industry and drive down global emissions as part of it.
I'm with the Electrical Trades Union in South Australia. For those that don't know, the Electrical Trades Union also includes the plumbers and the communications workers. So we have a broader interest. But for those that haven't encountered us before, we cover workers from black lines workers, from transmission and distribution networks, all the way down to people that will install your kind of EV chargers. We also have a lot of members in Whyalla, and so I've kind of really tracked the kind of shutdowns twice now, and you know, with all of that work going on. So because of that, I guess we're on the front lines and come at green steel from a bunch of different perspectives. Our members are responsible for kind of the rollout of transmission and the rollout of the generation that is going to power this. There is a boom of jobs at the moment for our members in that. There is also a boom as we electrify these facilities, and we're looking at kind of probably a doubling of the electrical workforce in a facility like Whyalla, and it's a kind of direct, I guess, increase. So from a really instrumental perspective, we're kind of seeing this growth. But I think the other perspective, and I came from a manufacturing union before the Electrical Trades Union, is that there's a real economic future for Australia as we move into kind of green manufacturing. And that's because in the 80s and beyond, we saw this real offshoring of a lot of Australian industries because we couldn't compete globally on the cost of labour. So we saw this real decline in kind of labour conditions in our manufacturing industries and an offshoring of that. But the thing is, in the future, our manufacturing industries are not going to be based on cheap labour, they're going to be based on cheap energy. And the only way that we're going to get cheap energy is if we base that on renewable energy and the kind of harnessing of renewables, whether it be solar or wind or backed by storage. And so that the future that we see it as these industries is that's going to be based on transitioning all of these facilities and electrifying these facilities and getting them onto a kind of cheaper energy source that allows them to compete globally. For our members, they, you know, their day-to-day won't change very much in those facilities. So it's not like closing down a coal-fired power station. They'll become newer, shinier, it won't break down quite as much. But it'll be sort of really jobs that look the same, whether or not like they're going into the future.
I'm going to throw you to the broader panel just with an open one now, which is, I guess, your thoughts on why you think green steel is a key opportunity for South Australia, but based on your, I guess, part of the puzzle, whether it's the workforce, whether it's investment, whether it's technology or the electricity, what's the key barrier that's keeping you awake at the moment? This is something we have to absolutely address if we're going to unlock a green steel future for South Australia.
Do a really quick one. Something that sort of surprised and encouraged me was that last year in South Australia, our wholesale electricity price was negative for about 30% of all price intervals. So 30% of all the time, our electricity price on the wholesale market was negative. And I got really excited, and it's opening up this opportunity for not just cheap electricity, but you could even be paid to use electricity, until I realised that actually most of the industrial plants are not exposed to the wholesale market because that's far too volatile. They're on power purchase agreements and things like that where they're locked in their prices for future years. So I think we're in this really interesting middle area where wholesale prices are coming down a lot of the time for most of the day, but we're not seeing that translated into the end electricity prices all the time. but I see the room for innovation. So I work in the innovation sector of the distribution network and see great opportunity for those businesses and industries that can take some more risks and maybe introduce new technologies that allows them to make use of that flexible demand. So being able to use electricity when it's incredibly cheap and then potentially use energy that is stored later. So I see that's maybe a bit of a transition barrier, one of those chicken and egg scenarios, but a fantastic opportunity if South Australia can make it happen.
Unpopular opinion, while I think South Australia would be my first choice for my first green steel plant in the world, it may not get it, and if it doesn't get it, it might miss out, and it could be existential for local iron and steel making. And so, and it's heroic even to get a Whyalla amount. So you would need that 3 to 5 gigawatts of capacity at least, which is, this idea of 100% renewables here is not what you need. You need 600% renewables here. And that's if you want to be in the game just for one Whyalla size plant, which is just replacing what we're doing. That's not even really doing a lot of export.
I think it does depend on what you mean by green steel, because some people will have very different views of what green steel is. I think I would also agree that, a couple of years ago, South Australia looked like it was in one of the best handful of locations in the world to move into truly green iron and steel. I worry that has changed quite significantly in the last 2 years, and the state government is backing away and shifting towards gas again. And some people would say that iron and steel made using gas qualifies as green steel because it's lower emissions than using coal, but it's still something like 1.6 to 1.7 tonnes of CO2 per tonne of steel if you use crude steel, if you use gas. So I'm just not convinced at all that just replacing one fossil fuel with another is going to be the way that this works. The big problem is that green hydrogen is very expensive, and there's some fairly significant doubts about how it will ever, or if it can get cheap enough. That said, there are examples, and I'm thinking of Europe, where off-take agreements are available from industries like automakers willing or able to pay a 20 or 30% premium for their steel. So given the Asia Pacific must be the largest car-making region in the world, there ought to be some opportunities. But it's that off-take, from a sort of investment point of view, if you don't have off-takers for your green steel, you're never going to reach financial close and start building it. So it's finding off-takers who are able to pay a premium for their steel because green hydrogen is still so expensive. That's the experience in Europe, is that if you can get those off-takers, everything sort of starts to fall into place as much as it can. But without those off-takers, it's very difficult.
Another unpopular opinion. Green hydrogen will never make it. So you lose more than half of the energy. You have to start with electricity to make green hydrogen. You lose more than half of that energy by the time it is hydrogen. And it looks like you'd need at least 8 megawatt hours per tonne. Whereas if you just do all electric processes without the hydrogen, you're under 4 megawatt hours a tonne. So I don't think anyone, and all of the cost estimates, the ambitious cost estimates of the US Department of Energy, the Australian Department of Industry for $1 or $2 a kilogram hydrogen, no one is near it. We're still at $10 and no one really has a viable path. So call it dead in the water. Now, that is, however, a tailwind behind the gas plan here, because the gas industry is like, use gas now, we'll put hydrogen in it later. But they're not honest, that it will never work. Steel is the #1 commodity material in the world. People aren't going to pay more for steel.
I'm going to switch focus and give you something else to stay awake. They keep you up at night. So I guess the key barrier for me is the workforce, like actually getting in enough workers, really. We are going through an economy-wide transition, and unlike the mining boom, we are trying to do this globally. We're trying to transition all of our economies, like from both the type of generation and also the technologies that we're using. In 2023, Jobs and Skills Australia said we were 42,500 electricians short for 2030. An electrical apprenticeship is 4 years long and 40% dropout halfway through, which means somehow we need to enrol another 60,000 next year, electrical apprentices, to be able to deliver our green steel future. The workers in our green steel plants, at least electrical workers, are incredibly mobile. They're not there because there's no such thing as a renewable electrician or an oil and gas electrician. We have members that will construct Snowy Hydro and then they'll move on to an oil and gas terminal in the Pilbara and then they'll move on to a hospital site. And so we are competing Australia-wide for these workers. The Pilbara now is almost all East Coast electricians. There's very few from WA because there's now a construction boom. It is now almost like there's about to be construction in Adelaide CBD, so people are not going to go to the regions if they can kind of work in the CBD. So we've been engaging, I guess, across the board with how do we up our kind of training. Really we have to stop that 40% dropping out, and we've been working on kind of mentoring schemes and training schemes, so there is hope, and then we just really need to kind of build out the number of places in our kind of vocational education sector. And if you know any young people, we can sign them up. We can get them into electrical apprenticeship.
Excellent. Thank you, Katie and all. Now, I don't mean this to be a dampener on enthusiasm for green steel, but it's more, while the potential is there are undoubtedly challenges that we need to overcome, and they're not simple challenges. Like, we don't have silver bullets. But the thing for me that I guess gives me great confidence is we've been here before. We have overcome huge, complex, multifaceted challenges to build our industrial base. We did it with iron ore. Building an iron ore industry in the Pilbara, not easy. Highly complex, building thousands of kilometres of rail line, figuring out how to blast and get ore out of some of the most remote spots in the world. We did it with the LNG sector, which is obviously driving the climate crisis, but from a technological and workforce point of view, pretty phenomenal. Floating offshore rigs that are drilling deep under the seabed, figuring out how to super chill and liquefy gas and then put it on specially designed ships to send around the world. Complex, but we did it. And I think even though we have these challenges facing us again, we know we can do solutions to big industrial challenges, and Australia has done this many times before, and we just have to apply our industrial know-how and policy might to build that future ahead of us. I'm going to stop pining and get back to the panel and their expertise. But Simon, I wanted to draw you in now, particularly because you've been doing a lot of work internationally at the moment. And I guess interested in you sharing from a global perspective what other countries are doing to make green steel bankable. How are other nations approaching this challenge, and what could we learn from what others are doing?
Well, I mentioned that Europe, as ever, has been sort of leading the way when it comes to the steel technology change or transition. I think as you've probably seen, when it comes to green hydrogen, there's been a bit of a reality check globally, and things have slowed down. A lot of proposed uses of green hydrogen, which always look pretty ridiculous, are finally being dropped. Steel transition proposals in Europe, they've also suffered a little, but there are also some which are sort of proceeding. There's a few lessons that you can sort of try and pull out of Europe, albeit from there's not, we're talking about a handful of projects, so it's not exactly a massive sample size, but generally speaking, projects that are GRI projects running on 100% gas have not tended to fare too well in Europe. Just to name one example, ArcelorMittal, one of the biggest steelmakers in the world, was given or had made available to it a grant of 1.3 billion euros, I think it's about 2.2 billion Australian dollars, to transition from a blast furnace-based operation in Bremen in Germany to a gas-based DRI plant. So that's pretty much half the capital cost of the project was being put on the table for it. But it's 100% gas-based. They can't get a premium for the steel they're producing, so they're just competing with everyone else. And they've cancelled the project on the sort of complaining that the cost of electricity and cost of gas is too high. Other projects that have some green hydrogen use from day one have tended to fare a little bit better. Other projects which are intending, especially if the green hydrogen production is integrated with the project. Other projects that have attempted to procure green hydrogen from third parties have struggled. So again, sticking with Germany, ThyssenKrupp is building a nuclear plant to replace one of its blast furnaces, and was intending to procure a small amount of green hydrogen from a third party, and has pushed that process back. Whereas Salzgitter, also in Germany, has got an integrated green hydrogen project, only 100 megawatts. We're not talking about 100% green hydrogen-based steel, but it's probably good for 10% of green hydrogen mix. That project is going forward. And probably the key example is Stegler in Sweden, which is a 100% green hydrogen-based DRI project under construction now. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, that was really only able to get going because it's been able to sign offtake agreements for its future production at a 20 to 30% premium. So yeah, I guess the key lesson perhaps is from Europe is that if you're just going down the gas route, you're going to have a problem. You're going to struggle. They've been struggling in Europe, and that's amid in an environment where there's an awful lot of government support available to try and protect the steel industry in Europe, and it's still not enough.
I look at it just from the fundamentals. So I think, another unpopular opinion, the technology that will be green steel isn't available at any scale or on any plant project on any board yet. So the basics are this: it takes 4.5 megawatt hours a tonne to make steel or iron in a blast furnace. The cost of coal, the portion of the energy in the metallurgical coal that contributes to that, is worth about a quarter of a cent per kilowatt hour. The cost of gas, if you're using gas as the heat, is about 2 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So if you want to make, and then the capital cost is about $1,000 per tonne per annum capacity for the plant. So if you want to compete, you need something, a machine with capex that's the same. You need an energy input price of about 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and you need to use less than 4 megawatt hours a tonne to make it. That rules out every technology that you've seen broadly advertised, but it doesn't rule out a couple of the people who are working on electrochemical pathways. And so the question in my mind is, that will happen. Then you say, well, where in the world is going to have electricity at 70 or 80% capacity factor at 3 cents a kilowatt hour? You could get that with a blend of wind and solar in South Australia. You could get that with a blend of wind and solar in Western Australia. You could beat that handily with gas in Saudi Arabia. So that's the dark horse in this race. And they might just beat us.
Not this week.
Not this week, no. You can roll on some PSC over in Adelaide, apparently. And there might be some places in Central America, but we have that advantage. In terms of the global outlook, I do a lot of work in Taiwan, some work in Korea, and some work in Japan. Those countries cannot hit their climate targets and maintain a domestic steel industry. So you think hydrogen's expensive, LNG is also very, very expensive. So to use Australian LNG to make steel in Japan from Australian iron ore would more than double the price of steel. So that's not going to happen either. So I think I call it the middle power strategy. Probably what you need here is something like Pax Electricana. So Australia, Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, going in together, using some of that Asian capital. Taiwan's a great example. They cannot add the grid capacity they need for the rest of their goals, and they want to build 32 new fabs for TSMC. This is a national security plan, and also continue to make steel. So we make steel, they make chips, and the same is true of South Korea. They would like to spend more of their proportion of their energy making chips. That's their high value add industry, and not making the iron. So we could be making iron steel there, and in the case of Japan, it's for cars. So that's the sort of international scenario that you could see coming together. It doesn't mean we don't play nicely with America and China. It's an alternative to that pathway. But at the end of the day, I still think you just have to think about the fundamentals, the energetics, and you can pick the places in the world that have a chance. It's not unclear that Saudi Arabia, after gas, could also, it could probably beat us on the price of solar. So depending upon the capex of the plant that you build, determines whether it needs to run 100% of the time or 50% of the time. All of the hydrogen capex is so high, they need to run those hydrogen plants 100% of the time. If you're running the plant 100% of the time, you don't get the advantage of that super cheap, sort of negatively priced electricity. So if you're adding one other thing you're looking for in the magic technology, is the ability to run, your capex is so low, your capex is so low that you can run the machine at half time, and then you just suck up all the lowest cost electrons. Those technologies are existing, they're existing in the lab. The existential problem for South Australia is, can you keep Whyalla running long enough to wait for that to happen? I'm a physicist and engineer and entrepreneur. When I see something that I think is the right thing, I'm like, we should just bet the farm on it. I believe this technology now exists. It's only doing things at 1 kilogram a day. If Australia was really in it to win it, you would do something like that $1 billion grant in Europe. That $1 billion would build you your first subscale plant. And that's the level of intent and commitment that you need to make. I think Australia intends to run second here, meaning we'll build the second green steel plant in the world. I think that's a losing strategy.
I love the point about international collaboration, because that's sort of my point of interest as well. And the World Economic Forum runs a First Movers Coalition, which is really like a group where they bring together the biggest buyers in the world, so the sort of demand for the technology, and also the biggest suppliers in the world, focusing on, among other things, green steel and also green cement. And they selected Adelaide in South Australia as the host of their Asia Pacific Green Steel Forums, earlier this year. So I like to think it's in part because I've been yelling at my old friends in Switzerland saying, look over here, look over here. Adelaide is doing great things. But it is kind of hard when you're trying to do global collaborations but representing a state. I think that I found that definitely on the World Energy Council stage, in that people look at the average of Australia, our average ambition for renewable energy, our average ambitions for, those kind of partnerships. So I think we need to go there, but that's the challenge that we're facing. And also, we talk about technologies that are maybe not as mature yet, or costs that are too high and things that are not possible, but they're not possible until someone makes them possible. And I think that's the point. You pick the winning strategy and you sort of try and go all in and break the chicken and egg dilemma. And I think you can only do that by looking at the demand side as well. So not just looking at green steel as the supply, but like who's actually going to be buying that, and making sure we diversify on that side. And sometimes it means moving before you're ready. So I just got back from Panama, where the World Energy Council community had their sort of global annual meeting. And we saw the example of Panama Canal, where they've introduced the concept of a net zero slot. So it costs a lot of money for a ship to be waiting to go into the canal. It takes a few hours to go through. But if you're powered by net zero fuels, then you can skip the queue. And once a day, they have a net zero ship come through. Now, the catch is there aren't any net zero ships, right? But that's okay, because you have to have this signpost here saying, like, you be the first one, and they put a price on it. They know how much it costs for a ship to be waiting in the canal. So, like, moving early before others are ready allows others to come in. So I think that's what I was getting out of that conversation.
I think they're really good points. Just drawing out the demand side a bit more too, Michelle, I think one of the things that has really struck me recently is, like, when we do look at, say, current hydrogen prices we're making in green steel, it is really expensive, like double what the current cost of steel is. But as soon as you flow that through to an end product, it's actually not that bad. You know, if you're talking about how much it costs to make a car out of 100% green steel today, you're talking, you know, maybe a $200 to $300 US premium tops. You know, on a $40,000 vehicle, $50,000 vehicle, whatever. You know, on the second-hand market, I don't know. I don't know what a new car costs these days. But, you know, I think often when we focus in the mid part, it looks hard, but when we focus in the end consumer spot where we're looking at the things that people actually buy, it becomes a lot easier, and that's where you can stimulate the demand. It makes it easier for steel companies to invest. And just to draw out your point, Saul, I think the key thing I'm taking from your point about the costs is also that even if a place has suboptimal economics, if it gets the first spot built, well, that's where it's going to stay.
These things, I live in Wollongong, I'm 12 kilometres from the largest point source of CO2 in Australia. It is existential for Wollongong too. I think Wollongong, very, very unpopular thing is to be from Wollongong and say in Wollongong, I think it's done. Maybe if Whyalla makes iron and you ship it around and we turn it into steel for domestic manufacturing, that's, so we build the EAF and you build the green iron, that's maybe a workable strategy for Australia. And really the action is going to be Western Australia in the 100 million tonnes a year range, which is what we need to be thinking about.
Katie, I'm going to go back to you now, just in terms of the workforce challenge. How have we solved these types of workforce challenges in the past? Like, how can we make sure we're bringing in enough either school leavers or people transferring careers or training up the global workforce to meet our ambition?
Look, I think in the past we had publicly owned entities, so we had a publicly owned power system, we had publicly owned kind of distribution networks, and they tended to be, and we had the publicly owned railways, and they tended to be the trainers. And they would overtrain apprentices, and then they would farm those apprentices out to the industry at large. Now, as we privatised, and this is more across Australia, like our kind of distribution networks and our transmission networks, what we've seen is that there are currently hardly any apprentices at all on transmission projects around the country. We get very few apprentices, if any, on renewables projects. We do have SAP in here, we do have Energy Queensland, and they do train a lot of apprentices, but not enough when you're starting to farm it out. And part of the problem there is that a lot of these projects, and I have to go broader than green iron, is that a renewables project is 9 months to 12 months to construct it, but an apprenticeship is 4 years. An apprenticeship requires a variety of skills. And but we have solutions for this already, which is group training organisations, which are effectively like a labour hire agency. So your renewables company does not become the employer of the apprentice. It is a group training organisation who is responsible to make sure they get a whole suite of skills across the apprenticeship, and then they farm them out to different projects across the board. And they provide that continuity. There's another benefit to group training organisations, which is that it's really, really good for marginalised cohorts. There are currently 4% of electricians are women. If we look at, and it's gone up to 4% after 3 decades of the union and others pushing for it. But if you look at licence holders in SA, only 1% of electrical licence holders in South Australia are women, which means that decades ago they didn't start, but they're also starting and then they're dropping out. What group training organisations do is it provides support, which means that when apprentices, they can provide more wraparound support, they can provide more mentoring, and they can get more women in, because with the maths of what we need with electricians, we're not going to get there if we're just relying on men to solve the problem. We actually need to diversify the trade, get more women in, we need to, make it less white, to be blunt, and that's some of the stuff that we're working on. We've got a Commonwealth funded program at the moment called Big Sister that we're looking at trying to up the intake rate to 15% women. In Queensland, our programs with Energy Queensland, they get us to 50% women. So we've done that, but we need to kind of actually get this kind of state-backed system that can farm it out to the private sector and do this like private-public partnership on training as well as, I guess, investment.
Thanks, Katie. And I think as a general policy principle, not relying on white men to solve things is probably a good one for many issues. Michelle, I'm going to throw to you now. I'm interested in, let's say if we did build a large-scale green iron industry, or just a single plant. Let's say it's a direct reduced iron facility feeding into an electric arc furnace today. Can the South Australian grid take that? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, my focus and expertise isn't on industrial scale, but I will say my first job at SF Power Networks was to answer the question of, can the grid take all of the electric vehicles on the network? And I'm very glad to say that after a couple of years working on that, the question is not if but how, and we're more like already looking towards how do we actually fit all of this new electrified demand, not just from transport and industry, but across the whole sector. It's not about if we can fit it in, but how we make sure it fits in the right times of day. And I was sort of emphasising that flexibility of demand as well. But as you rightly point out, Saul, a lot of facilities have to operate 24/7. So we need to get a bit more creative in the diversity of supply. So I think, we're pretty well set in the middle of the day. South Australia was the first place in the world to a grid this size to be 100% powered by rooftop solar. So that's the solar on people's homes and businesses feeding back into the grid, which means every single light bulb and fridge and mining operation and factory in the state was powered by rooftop solar. And now that happens almost every day for a large part of the daylight hours. So definitely it's possible. I think the good thing about areas like Whyalla and that general Upper Spencer Gulf is that you can look at it in a zone and make sure you're matching the supply and demand and transmission and distribution build out as well. I believe that SF Power Networks are now our partners at Electrify and others have already built a lot of the electrical infrastructure down that way, ready for that. So I think it's not if, but how, and how can we do it to maintain a reasonable price. I think you could put as much as you want on the network at a cost, and that cost is not just dollars, but it's also the time and the workforce. So again, if we try and fit on this doubling or tripling of electricity throughput that we need to have in the sort of electrification and demand increase in our state, we could do that a really cheap way, in a really expensive way. We already, at SF Power Networks, have our next, decade full of work of new connections, new developments, upgrading infrastructure, that upgrading network to cater for supply where we could instead use it in the middle of the day is not very efficient. And we're already having to import skilled workers and rapidly train new workers. So yeah, it's yes, if we can do it at the right times of day and or diversify our supply.
I'll throw to you in the audience.
Okay. Hi. Hi. This is the first time in my life that I've heard Saul say, and I probably should have been listening, before, but the first that you saying hydrogen isn't going to work, and therefore the green steel in Whyalla isn't going to work through hydrogen.
I've been saying it forever, so you're not. The politicians still haven't heard it. Embarrassing for me, but so I'm processing this in real time, so forgive this question, but so I really buy the electrify everything argument that I've heard on the basis of it being the most efficient thing to do, and that's an engineering argument that is about efficiency, and I think that works for 80% of the economy. I also think that sometimes people do things that aren't the single most efficient things to do from either an economic or an engineering perspective because it works for some kind of other systemic benefits or human benefits. We spend more on alcohol than we do on electricity, so obviously we don't care that much.
And so when I'm thinking about that, my understanding of, and sometimes only making decisions on the basis of efficiency, economic or engineering actually leads to less overall system resilience because the zero-sum efficiency isn't always resilient. And my understanding of green steel is that the hydrogen in the DRI isn't being used as an energy carrier, it's being used as a chemical reductant. I have to look at my notes to try to understand what I want to ask you. That you need something to strip the oxygen atoms off the iron ore, so your options are carbon, hydrogen, or direct electrolysis, and that it's not just electrifying in the same way as it is for other applications in other parts of the economy. And also in South Australia, we've got this amazing woman called Rachel Burton who's making hydrogen out of agave.
I might jump in there and just, I think for the recording, the core question here is if if green hydrogen isn't the most economically and engineering efficient pathway, what is? But also doesn't hold us back because we often do things which are not the most efficient economically or rationally or healthily or anything for our body.
Well, because there's other systemic reasons to do it, like we want green steel, like like Edison apparently when he wanted to electrify everything, everyone was against it, and when he said you can use the same pipes as you use for gas, everyone in London was like, well, okay. You know, so the idea that you can use the same pipes, like there's a historical precedent for that being something that actually creates the social and political will to do the thing.
Absolutely. I'm just conscious we can't hear the recording, but there's people in the audience, so I'm going to throw to you, Saul, but I will just say to this point, this is Saul's strong opinion. I personally have a slightly different one. I think it's probably going to be a mix, and for somewhere like South Australia, it will make sense because of the ore type and the renewable potential to go pretty hard and fast to get the first green hydrogen-based direct iron facility. But that's just an opinion, and obviously the challenges and pathways are hard. But Saul, I might throw to you, mate, as that was directed at you.
I think in most domains, like obviously it's cheaper to drive an electric car overwhelmingly than petrol, but people still drive petrol because they like the sound. So I think, you know, there's that. That's not true in an international commodity market like steel or iron. So I think here it is going to come down to the brutal economics. The electrify steel argument is that efficiency argument. Also, hydrogen, you lose 50% of the energy in electrolysis, you lose another 20% in compression and decompression. You lose it leaking. Hydrogen is a secondary climate greenhouse gas, which is a headline that unfortunately no one's read. So any hydrogen done at scale is a problem like methane. So I think that's a lot of headwinds. Yes, you're only going to use it for the oxidation part, deoxidation part of the process, probably, but then you still have to have very, very cheap electricity for the rest of the process if you're going to do it all electrically. On balance, I think this just means it's not going to win. I've seen a thing that does work, that's all electric, that's doing it at way less than half the energy, and it doesn't have to operate 24/7 because it's got a lot of capex. So I believe the better thing will win here, and you have to have the things on the economics. And I do believe, you know, the hydrogen story is very much driven by the gas industry. They're the only people in the world who sell hydrogen today. They've told lies. You can't put hydrogen in natural gas pipes because it embrittles the steel. You have to line the pipes, so it would have to be a total retrofit. So it's not a drop-in for anything in any process. It's unbelievably dangerous. I made hydrogen tanks myself with technology to Porsche and Toyota, so I've shot hydrogen tanks in the desert. And like the third time they kill you, it's with an invisible flame. Right? The first time they kill you, it's with the shock wave from the release of the energy in the tank. The second time they kill you, you suffocate, and the third time you burn dead. I mean,
if Saul asked you to come for a drive in back to the desert, I was like, not today.
Hydrogen is inhospitable in every way. It's expensive. I just think it may win for unbelievably irrational reasons. I just cannot see it. And I have to be honest, because I think the Australian government has already blew a hell of a lot of money, including money that Twiggy didn't spend but won't get back, right, on a fantasy that anyone in physics, my mate Joe Rom wrote a book on this. He ran the hydrogen program at the Department of Energy in the US in the year 2000. He wrote a book called The Hype About Hydrogen, and he just did a reissue 20 years later, and he was right the first time. It's never going to work.
I'm going to jump in there just to keep us moving, because I actually want to segue off into one of the challenges which you're touching on, which is a challenge is...
The gas industry owning Australian politics.
We're going to get there, actually, in just a minute. But first I want to touch on one of the challenges for any green steel, regardless of pathways, is it's competing just as a standard commodity. You know, steel is steel because there's no differentiation. But I know, Simon, you've been looking a bit at this, and particularly like when we say what is green steel, you mentioned this at the very beginning, like how do we get around that? How do we actually prove that something is green so markets can actually attach a premium to it?
If you haven't asked me that, that is a whole hornet's nest, which is nowhere near being solved, but definitely a lot more work needs to be done in defining what is what is green steel. Unfortunately, there's about 100 different definitions floating around the world, and there's no real sort of consensus. Maybe we're about to see one in Europe, because I think that there's policy coming in Europe where there's going to be some green steel standards and labelling, which might start. I haven't seen any details on what exactly the intensity of that labelling, where they can land. Potentially, if given it's the European Union, maybe that'll be something that everyone coalesces around. But, and yeah, I go back to this offtake. You're right, it's a traded commodity, unless you can, if you're trying to go to a bank and saying, I'm going to build a DRI plant, I'm going to run it on 100% green hydrogen, and it's going to cost 20, we'll have to sell it for 30% premium. The bank is not going to give you the money, because they're going to say, who on earth are you going to sell it to? Who's going to buy it? Unless you can go to them with long term, like 10 years plus, 15 years perhaps, offtake agreements for steel that you haven't made yet, you're not going to get that finance. And I guess I kind of literally sit between the two of you, but also I absolutely would agree that where we would want to be is direct electrification. There's a long list of benefits, including the fact that you can use any type of iron ore. The grading of iron ore is not an issue with direct electrification processes. But I do think perhaps, well, first of all, we don't know how long those technologies are at commercial scale, how far away they are. And I do think there is potential, I mean, projects like Stega in Sweden, which have those offtake agreements, will be selling green steel at a premium to car makers. I think there are some opportunities for a bit of green hydrogen-based DRI, selling to those industries where, as you say, the cost doesn't have an impact on the cost of the final product, such as a car. If you're building a bridge made of steel, 30%, it's just never going to work. So I kind of sit in between the two of you, and I've forgotten what your question was, so I've rambled on a bit.
It was steel certification, but that's right. I think it's good rambling. I'm going to get to the spicy stuff now, which is not shooting hydrogen canisters in the desert spicy, but I want to talk about gas and gas lock-in risks, particularly given, a couple of weeks ago we saw a very large 200 petajoule offtake agreement of gas by the South Australian government, 20 petajoules per year between 2030 and 2040. What are the risks of this? Happy to throw to you first, Simon.
Well, I can start and then pass it along. So yeah, I'm pretty concerned about what we're seeing with the gas sector's continuing influence on Australian politics. We've got the Premier of South Australia saying that a gas project in another state needs to be opened up in order to allow this transition at Whyalla. That's basically just repetition of a gas industry talking point. I don't see how Australia is going to compete with the Middle East on gas-based DRI when the cost of gas in the Middle East is a third of what it is in the East Coast market in Australia. I still, and call me paranoid, but I still see the gas industry pushing CCS, and CCS, its ugly head rising again. It never seems to go away. CCS is actually quite a major component of SA's, carbon capture and storage. So this idea that we can capture carbon at steel plants and store it underground. So CCS is a fairly significant component of South Australia's new infrastructure strategy. And last year, Infrastructure SA published a report which said that carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture at Whyalla and storage at Moomba, what is that, 750 kilometres away? That could be the foundation of a wider CCS ecosystem in South Australia. Yes, I'm worried about gas lock-in. continue to be concerned about the influence that the gas sector has on Australian politics. Anyone else want to hear?
I tried to bid on Whyalla and they wouldn't even talk to me. So they're not serious at taking people who have an alternate path. I predict you'll build gas at Whyalla and I predict that it'll be shut down by 2037.
I might take this, from an outside perspective, looking into places like South Australia that have, a world-leading uptake in variable renewable electricity. I should say variable renewable electricity. We have the highest levels in the world in terms of the contribution of, consumer-owned, distribution-connected rooftop solar and batteries to a grid. And I want to see us maintaining the energy trilemma of energy, like sustainability, like clean energy, which we have been investing in, energy accessibility, equity, including affordability, and also reliability. And the reason I say that is that I'm all for 200% renewable electricity, and I think our targets should be more holistic. 500, 700%? Yeah, 1,000%. But I think, we were speaking earlier about it needing to be an energy target, not an electricity target. So I want to say at the same time, we're I think the only state, or at least the state with the closest 100% renewable electricity target. We should celebrate that. The world definitely celebrates that for us, but it's not enough. Like, it needs to be a national 100% renewable electricity target, I should say, and a energy target, basically. And that was my preamble to sort of say that one of the amazing things that happened in South Australia last year is that the electricity market operator, AEMO, reduced the amount of synchronous gas generation that is needed on our grid to maintain system security, system reliability. So the saying goes, you can't have all this wind and solar that's variable without having a base load, but AEMO is increasingly getting confidence that we can reduce the minimum synchronous contribution of gas to our grid at one time, which is great. So across a year, you look across a year, South Australian electricity generation was supplied by net 73% renewables and about 10% gas, right? That number's going down and down over time, but it's not going to zero yet. So although I think we're in a transition, I would hate to see our whole system fall over if we didn't have that minimum amount needed, and it will be replaced over time. Last year, South Australia also hit a world record of the contribution of utility-scale batteries to our grid. So we had 40.6 of our needs met by utility-scale batteries. And the more and more utility batteries we have, the less we rely on gas. But then in our, the public holiday in January, the heat wave, during that heat wave, the utility-scale batteries ran out. They ran out of juice, and then gas had to kick in and diesel had to kick in, right? So, I don't have an opinion onto your question, but I want to give a couple of facts just to...
Look, just to reiterate, and look, we have members that will run the pipelines, the gas pipelines, like we have in renewables. So this is something and a way that we talk about with our members at Whyalla. But when I was talking to our branch about this, they were talking about already Whyalla is facing this existential problem that it is so expensive to kind of produce steel there, and you're going to lock it into a more expensive type of fuel. Like, I take the points about how expensive hydrogen is at the moment, but there are other technologies that we have and other pathways. When we talk about these gas offtakes, it often misses what the broader infrastructure kind of build is of a pipeline and what that will do, and then how do we actually meet that capex and how do we meet all of that extra cost. And what does that mean for the decisions we make, not only at somewhere like Whyalla and Green Steel, but a lot of the other facilities that we have. We have members of Port Pirie and others, and so does that mean that we prevent the switching over of these? So what's the roadmap? If we are talking about this as a transition fuel, what is our roadmap to kind of get us on? And that's like, how do we actually stage this out? And how do we look at, because what we're seeing from me in a national policy role is the conversations that are happening between South Australia and New South Wales, for example, at Tomago, and we saw an outright rejection of gas by Rio Tinto there. But we did see those conversations kick off because of the relationship between the two states and because of some of these kind of offtakes as well. So it's something that we look at from a financial as much as anything else perspective.
Thank you, Katie. And yes, I think that infrastructure lock-in is a key one too, that even if it's, we'll just use this gas for a few years, But if you've got a long life, 25-year, payback period for a pipeline, the incentive is going to be there to keep pumping gas, keep using gas, regardless of the actual needs. I've got a final question to throw, then I'm going to open it up. So start prepping your questions and or challenges or whatever you have in your pocket now. But for our panel, for a closing note from each of you, if you were advising the South Australian government tomorrow, maybe some of you are already actually, but what is, I guess, the number one action you would be calling for in order to secure a green steel future for South Australia? I might start with you, Michelle, again, and we'll work this way.
If I had to say one thing off the top of my head, it would be to have more holistic clean energy targets. I think that's something that I was quite surprised at going into the global context and talking about our amazing progress in electricity, but then everyone else will be talking about the energy transition, takes everything else into consideration. And if you do that, it also brings in the conversation of demand, and like I was going back to, the green steel future won't exist if we don't have off-takers in demand. So I think looking at the whole package as one.
Only one recommendation?
Yeah, maybe three if you're really pushing. I actually had three written here, but I was like, oh, bloody hell am I?
I only had one.
You want to be the most attractive place in the world to build first-of-a-kind de-risking pilot plant. We have the money in ARENA, National Reconstruction Fund, Future Made in Australia, CEFC. Like, honestly, Australia can afford to do this by itself. For some reason, the people who run those programs think that we're broke and we can't afford it. We're requiring huge cost share for the very high risk first plants. We should be more generous if you want to be competitive. Like literally, a Varga senator in Indiana is out-competing the Australian Renewable Energy Agency to host the first pilot plant of technology that I think has a very good chance of winning. So you've got to be in it to win it, and we're not hitting high enough to win it. You've got to make the commitments for 3 to 5 gigawatts of generation. That's 500% here. I think it's a good thing for everyone to know, when you electrify the Australian economy, you're going to need 3 times as much electricity as we have today. That covers the cars and the homes and the small businesses. So that's 300% renewable Australia is just baseline. If you want to convert our 100 million tonnes of export iron ore into 60 million tonnes of export iron, and you want to turn all of our bauxite into aluminium domestically, we need about 1,000%. So it's absolutely unbelievable amount, but you need to make that commitment. You need to get the incentives right. I think, and somebody in Australia has to bite off building the EAF as the downstream offtake, because the iron maker is unlikely to be the steel maker, at least in the short term.
I think I would say just question what the gas sector is telling you. I mean, like the Cooper Basin gas production, I think a lot of it, I'm not a gas analyst, but I believe a lot of it's approaching the end of its operating life. There's pretty massive rehabilitation liabilities connected to those, and one way of pushing those liabilities away is to pretend you can use those depleted gas wells for carbon capture and storage. So, yeah, just question the motivations.
I'm going to pick up my first one is about the holistic matching up of kind of demand and energy generation, and to kind of go broader and say that we need a kind of plan that takes in the whole state, because one way to kind of reduce this kind of workforce constraint that we have is to kind of just smooth out that pipeline so we're not having these peaks and troughs. So having that roadmap of kind of demand, transmission, of building out these projects, but also knowing where the renewables are going to come from, mean that we can actually move workers around instead of needing this kind of huge uptake and then what we call the valley of death, where everyone gets made unemployed again, and we keep cycling like that. So really that roadmap functions in a whole lot of ways.
I guess my 2 cents on this is applying the lessons of the past. I think one of the challenges we've got facing at this moment at the moment, the challenge of how do we build industry now, is we haven't built industry for like 40, 50 years in a very genuine sense. We've been through the neoliberal era where we thought industry just fell out of the sky through neoliberal market economics, and it's not how industry is built. The way we've always built industry in the past is that the government has stepped in to provide secure, long-term, low-cost power to industry, and has typically also struck the first offtake agreements to say, we will buy what you're selling. And that's what helps make these projects bankable and gets them built. We just need to do that again, but with clean energy, not massive coal plants. Like, you know, we've done it before, let's do it again. All right.
Saul, you've drawn the distinction between green steel and green iron. Could you just give us a basic outline what the difference is and where it sort of fits in this whole argument?
Iron is the element. We don't use raw iron or cast iron for very many applications anymore. Steel is an alloy of iron. It's about 98% iron, it's about 1% carbon, and there's tiny bits of other things. Stainless steel has got a fair amount of nickel and chromium. So iron making is just making a high purity iron. So Australian iron ores are 50 to 60% iron. It's kind of incredible that up the way of the dirt is iron. You've got to get that up north of 95, preferably 98, 99% iron content. That is something that could be a briquette or a DRI, direct reduced iron, equivalent as an input into the steel making process. Green steel, like a huge amount of the world's steel is recycled. It's the thing we recycle most in the world. You could make green steel today just by doing a renewably powered electric arc furnace using scrap steel. If you are having a really big idea, there's so much steel in gas infrastructure that's aging out in Australia that if you fed that into an electric arc furnace for 5 to 10 years, it would more than satisfy all of our domestic demand, and then you'd be ready to feed it with a DRI equivalent that you'd make for the electric industry.
And I might just add a little bit more too. So steel making is kind of a 3-stage process. We dig up iron ore, then we need to reduce it into iron, and then it gets turned into steel. 90% of the emissions happen in that first stage, but often like a blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace, those 2 steps happen together, which is why we call it an integrated steel making process. It's we've integrated both steps. Pretty much whatever pathway we follow in the future, it's going to be separate stages, and whether it's going to be an electrochemistry pathway for that, getting all the junk basically out of the iron ore, so you just get the iron. There's a few different pathways, but for the steel making, it's probably going to be electric arc furnaces. And the good news, we've already got 2 in Australia. We've got one in Adelaide and one in Ruby Hill. We just need more of them because they're just used for scrap, and we need to use them to, make high purity, high quality steel.
Tom, you mentioned that there was no silver bullet, but this company, Element Zero, is doing a pilot plant in our Tom Forest using electro-reduction technology, and they've got patents on them. And I was going to ask Saul if he's able to read the patents. But if we're going to give these companies money from the government, should the government be negotiating with them that if they're successful, that it could be deployed by other countries?
I think Element Zero's got a shot on goal, but they're not there yet. I have looked at the patents. They're not all wrong, they're mostly right. And they're totally put them in the leading half dozen groups.
Have they done more than the kilogram?
That's not what they're doing wrong. I'm negotiating with ARENA, Australian Renewable Energy Agency, to do a $40 million project to get from 150 grams an hour to 1,000 tonnes a year. With some American friends of mine, it's a $40 million project, and I have dared to ask the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, are you going to insist on Australian ownership of the company that does this? And they said no. that we were going to give half of that money to an American company to own it all. And I have worked in America and I've done 200. Sorry, got it.
Yeah.
There we go. That's better. Okay. So Australian Renewable Energy Agency proposing a $40 million project to get to 1,000 tonnes a year. 2 years worth of work. Just so you could put this in perspective, Bell Zero, this company I'm working with, other companies, 2 years probably gets you 1,000 tonnes a year. From that, that's very pre-commercial pilot. That's sort of one line. You would build 100 lines in a real plant to get somewhere like 1 million tonnes a year. And that 1 million tonnes a year plant is probably 5 years after you've got 1,000 tonnes. So we're within a decade now to be at scale. It's going to take everyone that long. Anyway, we asked for $40 million, and I think Australian Renewable Energy Agency wants to give it, but I said, well, they're going to require Australian ownership, and they said no. So I have worked in the US. You cannot get money from the US government unless it has US ownership. So I challenged them and said, why don't you think we should do this? And they gave me neoliberal blah, blah, blah. We could be smart, we just choose not to.
Well, on that note, I was very excited to hear about the employment opportunities. I work sort of in education, including vocational education, and a lot of mental health issues with young people because they see that there's no future. And listening to the news about the potential electrification of the employment opportunities is exciting. And I'm wondering if there's any input, you may not know the answer to this and I might need to go and research it, about the new trade schools which are so big and getting so much attention in the defence industry. And it's all about defence, 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 which, I have great ideological issues with. Won't go there. But kids also don't necessarily want to go into that field. But I think this sort of, what you were going on about, Katie, is actually really exciting. And I don't know if it's being supported by the government very much. Does anyone know anything about that, or do I need to go?
Look, it is supported. So I think there are new energy apprenticeships, and basically you get a $10,000 additional apprentice payment if you're in a new energy job or a new energy apprenticeship. Now, a lot of those don't exist at the moment because you can't do an apprenticeship in renewables, but we've basically argued that anyone doing an electrical apprenticeship, and we won this with the government, it's a new energy job. So pretty much, even if you're working in a defence job or a concrete apprenticeship, because that training is so mobile as an electrician, and I think it is the same for plumbers, but I will take that on notice, because you can then go into electrifying whatever else that is then available for that payment. There's also been they've established a couple of new kind of training centres, one in WA, we've got our own training centre here. But one of the things that we've noticed is that in TAFE you can't actually do a renewable energy elective anywhere in Australia under Step 3. You can still go and work in renewables without having done the elective, but they're a little bit more expensive. We have them in our training centres, so to take that through, you can then go and work wherever you want, but it is just, these are large hunkering beasts, and so we're really trying to kind of promote that up. And I think, it's definitely something that they're kind of paying attention to, but we need to kind of really pick up the numbers and get more spaces into trade school.
Just going to intercept. What's really interesting about electrification is proportionally makes a lot more local jobs. This is less true of industry, but absolutely true of household electrification. The average Australian household spends $5,000 a year on fuels. The majority of that leaves the community on a one-way ticket. $4,000 leaves your postcode immediately. In my community, we have one petrol station. We spend $25 million a year there. When that goes away and we're all driving electric cars off our rooftop solar, there'll be about an extra $12 million a year in the community. We calculated out, it's about 6 or 8 electrician jobs, but the really interesting thing is it's about 80 jobs born off spending that $12 million other ways. So absolutely love the ETU, love your work. We need more of it, we need a lot of the electricians, but if we do this right, this is the economic project of our time for reinvigorating Australian communities.
Yeah.
I think that the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves really matter, and I think that young people who are looking for jobs, or even people who are thinking of pivoting, not just those fresh out of school, are listening to the things they hear from the government and from their friends and family. And when you see our number plates saying, you know, the defence state or the festival state, like that's the story that we as South Australians tell about ourselves. And when I finished my engineering degree, the only job offers I really got were in defence, and I thought that doesn't really align with what I want to be working on, so I moved into state and then overseas. And I only came back, so my first job in South Australia was actually at SA Power Networks, after some friends of mine, you know, were telling me how cool it is and all the great work happening in the innovation space. So I think that's a role maybe we all have to play, but also to sort of hold our, you know, elected leaders to account, and that the things that they invest in and the things they talk about are what people will see. Oh, there's going to be a future in that. So I think that's really important. I had more to say. Oh, maybe actually about the trades as well. And I think the biggest skill that anyone needs coming into the workforce now is adaptability, and as long as we're sort of training for that. I didn't know I was going to be on the panel today, but I did wear my Energy Masters socks. So this is, I wear them all the time, Energy Masters is a project that our team, SA Power Networks, is working on to help foster an ecosystem of smart electric efficient homes. And one of the key findings that came out of our recent report was that there is a real intersection of trades needed. You know, when you're installing smart appliances, electric heat pumps, electric hot water, you need like the plumber, the electrician, the IT person as well. And we're finding that is a challenge to find one person who has all those skills. So I think, if anything, as long as these defence training centres are really teaching adaptable skills, I expect a lot of them maybe will migrate to the energy space. And we won't need to say renewable energy space, it will just be the energy space, because it will be more renewable.
The one last anecdote I'll go through to you shortly. I'm from Ballarat, and we, aside from South Australia, are another one of the big wind heartlands of the country. But when COVID hit, we had this big drama because the wind industry used to just fly in engineers from Germany when turbines had issues. And obviously they could do that. It was like, oh, what are we going to do? But as a result, the local industry and government got together to build the Wind Worker Centre, where we've got a training turbine that training workers can climb up, understand how it works, and get their tickets and stuff to work on it. And it's such a good example, I think, of where we have industry partnering with unions, partnering with the community to actually create safe, secure, well-paid positions that are local. And we should be doing that more broadly.
Wow, so lovely. Well done.
I'm not going to give.
Saul? I woke up at 2:30 in the morning, which is too early.
Can you hold the
because of everything going on in the Middle East and following what had happened in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the stopping of LNG production and seeing the gas price go up 50% in one day and realising that's going to hit households in South Australia who will pay the global energy prices while at the same time Santos and Beach would make a fucking fortune. And wishing that we could have a windfall levy like some other countries have, and that we could have that put into an energy sovereign fund for South Australia, and imagining for the whole early hours of the morning what would become possible if we could fund it, and coming up with 20 different things. And so that question that you asked everyone on the panel of like, if you could have one thing, what would it be? For me right now would be that levy, because I think that this instability will go on for a while. Okay, right, over to you guys.
Absolutely. So I'll pass down to you, but I completely agree, and we'll just say electrification is an anti-war act. So, get your electric car and battery.
Even without the price volatility of gas caused of it being a war fuel, there were good studies last year. I think 80% of countries would save money if they never bought fossil fuels again. So if you are a fossil fuel importer, it's economic to go all electric. Why is China winning at electrification? Because China does not want to buy oil from America or Russia or Iran. There are three bad options. So it really wholesale committed to electrification starting in 2012. It was a very technocratic decision. It was the right one, went with thermodynamics. If you model Australian households, and we did this, if we electrified every appliance in every car as they retire. So your old car kicks the bucket, you make sure the next one's electric. Same with your water heaters and everything else. Australia would save $1 trillion on imported fossil fuels by 2050. So we absolutely can afford to do it. So we've used this to argue with the Australian government that they should be making concessional loans to people so that because the problem barrier, let's be clear, for most people is the upfront cash to do the upgrade when things go. And there's always a trader to say, oh, I've got a cheap gas one in the back of the truck, mate, and then you're locked in your own house for another 30 years. So we can absolutely, we've done the modelling, we did the modelling with Treasury agreed with us, this is a good idea. We just got to put enough political pressure on the government to, so that they don't think it's going to ruin the weekend or whatever it's going to ruin.
I'll just briefly, first of all, I think fucking fortune is the correct terminology from a finance perspective. What's happening in Iran is just horrible. One of my close colleagues on my team is Iranian, used to work in the Iranian steel industry, major DRI producer. And it's just awful. I try, every time there is we see these fossil fuel price spikes, I do just take some hope from it. I just feel that every time we see these spikes, and it's not always a war, that just kills off a little bit more long-term demand for fossil fuels. Recently, we've seen a sort of rollback of environmental and climate concerns globally, and everyone's focused on energy security. That's the buzzword. We must have fossil fuels for energy security. Well, right now they're not looking too secure based on fossil fuels. So it's awful, but I take some hope from it from a sort of energy transition point of view.
Yeah, just to back in what everyone else said, I think the fact that this stuff has been exported without tax is obscene. And that really that if you look at comparable economies around the world, there has been that investment that's been happening. Even without the volatility, it's pretty clear from everything that's said on the panel that energy policy is industry policy. We have a problem at the moment in which a lot of the time these things are kept separate and siloed in government. We try and bring those things together. So you've got a bunch of those funds, and I think what's really come clear here is that unless we start to keep those together, we're going to see that kind of exposure globally and not really track those pathways that we're having, and that's what we really need to drill down to.
You mentioned government. We've got a state election coming up soon. I don't know the politics of possibility behind this. Is there the will and the capability to take on something like this to see the risks as well as the benefits and make decisions that aren't timid?
I mean, we're already doing a not timid thing to the tune of $1 million a day to keep Whyalla open.
Yeah.
So, and that's coming from the federal government. So we obviously have pockets and that want to protect jobs. That's what that money is trying to do. Surely we can dig, a few millimetres deeper into the pocket and actually invest in making this the fertile ground that the first green iron place in the world is. And it is absolutely doable. We have a better shot on goal than anyone else, but we're going to fail because of lack of ambition and wanting to come second.
As a South Australian who will be voting in the upcoming election, one of the things I've been doing in the lead up is trying to work more on the political literacy of the other sort of young people, passionate people in my circles. I think you mentioned before that mental health of young people losing faith in the system. I think the more that we can keep that hope going, better. So actually there's an event happening this Saturday, and there was another one last Saturday, run by a group of young people in Melbourne who are really want to take opportunity for South Australia's election coming up to educate local young people about the different climate policies, past, present and future of the different parties. So that's being run by not too young to run, not too young to vote, not too young to care. And I think maybe for the people in my circle, we get inspired by events like this. So if I could encourage all of you, next time you come, bring along a friend, a niece or nephew or a partner or a grandchild or someone else's grandchild, whatever. There are lots of events happening like this all over the place. Yeah. To keep these conversations happening. You should also follow, we just launched a page, Future Energy Leaders Australia, as an attempt to kind of keep these conversations happening. And we just launched our first article on offshore wind today, actually. So that's on LinkedIn, Future Energy Leaders Australia.
Offshore wind would be a great way to use a lot of Australian green light.
To go even in a smaller classes. I come from the Netherlands. I've talked to the ladies here. I was about 10. If I had the electricity light on in my room, or I had the tap water running, I was in deep trouble at home because we learned in school already why. Why don't we go to the kindergarten and start learning there and go from kindergarten in high up to the high school? Because what we're doing here, you can do with kids, and your kids teach parents.
I built electric go-karts with my local public school last year, and all 60 11-year-olds. I wore an Electrify Adelaide t-shirt one day. It was Electrify someone, I can't remember, and the principal came and said that was too political and I can't wear a t-shirt.
Respond on that quickly. Our children, it's not on. My son built with a group in Mount Barker the first solar bike. That he's now 44. So there's a lot of possibilities in schools. They were the first in South Australia to run up to Alice Springs and back.
The problem is Labor is not scared. My local Labor member asked me to host, because apparently she thinks the kids like me, a forum so that she can tell them to stop riding their electric bikes and scaring the old ladies. And I'm like, they're riding in protest of the fact you took their social media away, you want to take the power away from the bike so I can't climb a hill, and you don't, it's illegal to ride on the road and it's illegal to ride on the footpath. So you haven't even given the kids an inch.
No.
I would ride in protest too. The strategy of Labor apparently is to have community forums, let people be heard and then just keep not doing anything.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I was just going to make a comment about depoliticising this conversation. I just love, but I love like when you're talking about electrification, like it's not all always about the environment, even though like I believe it is. You talk about, oh, this is actually way more convenient, this is a great car, like this is you have independence, you know, you're not reliant on the big, I don't know, importing stuff, like shouldn't everyone want that? I don't know.
I want to lean into your unpopular opinions, Saul, because I suspect they're not as unpopular as you think. Are there any other, electrochemical things? If we're going to hedge our bets, if we're going to come second in green iron or green steel, what do we do instead or as well to kind of not completely lose the race? Is there anything?
It is really hard. And Wollongong just made the same bad choice. We relined the blast furnace and locked in another 30 years. Oh. And no one would believe. The catch-22 is that the technology exists. It doesn't matter whether it's your guys in Western Australia or my mates in the US, the other efforts. Someone will do it, but it's not 100% without risk. So it depends on how long you think you can keep Whyalla running and enough jobs going. But I think what nobody really understands is that if you commit to, no matter what you commit to replacing Whyalla with, it's still a 5 to 10 year rebuild. Mm. So I think it requires fortitude, and we need to believe in science again, and like everyone wants to believe in some magical economics, which is why they keep thinking hydrogen is on the table, because they look at the economics that people are promising, they don't look at the fundamental physics, which says hell no. And I think we need to be brutal. We used to make decisions like that. We decided to be the bull country. We made a lot of decisions in the 50s that set us up for success. We no longer wish to do those. Mm.
But I would just say, when it comes to Whyalla, the one no regrets tech that we could invest in is an electric arc furnace, because that's how we're going to do steel making. We can electrify what's already electrified, we can power it with renewables, and even if we haven't got the iron making sorted, we can, if we make sure the oil and gas sector, particularly off the coast of WA, is required to process and decommission locally, then we'll have a supply of scrap steel to feed that EAF, to give us that runway to get whichever iron making technology wins in the end.
You said 2037. What do you think will happen in 2037? Do you think one of these electrolysis technologies will reach commerciality by 2037?
I think they reach commerciality in 2032. And then there's, it's a big, the steel market globally is big enough to have some low and high price bidders for a while, but not forever.
450 blast furnaces to replace in China?
Yeah.
How do you think that'll play out?
Oh, I think that's going to take a while.
I also jump in on China. We're going to see a washout there because China's past its peak steel demand. We're going to see closures because alongside an overbuild of blast furnaces, there's also been government policy to expand the fleet of electric arc furnaces. But at the moment, the blast furnaces are taking all the scrap. And so I actually think once the policy settings flip or once China lands cost-effective electrolysis, which I actually think is going to come earlier, like the indications coming out of a few projects in China at the moment suggest they're getting down the cost curve much quicker than they thought. It's going to see a big closure, not just of China's blast furnaces, but other countries. And I think we've got to see where that washout happens because we're past peak global steel demand and we're going to see more recycling and just lower demand overall.
Can you just repeat that statistic about 2030 electricians and SOX, please?
It's Jobs and Skills Australia Clean Energy Generation Report. If you look at their high scenario, which is effectively a green export scenario, it's 42,500 electricians short by 2030.
All right, with that, we're going to call it a night. Thank you all so much, both for your time and your questions and your attention. Hopefully that has been illuminating, and feel free to come and quiz us more over a beer once we stand up.